The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. Yeshua has gathered a few of his disciples at this point, and then he is going to talk to a group of people. And actually what he's doing is he is talking in a kind of a corner of a ravine where you've got this kind of natural amphitheater situation. There's a large group of people that he's going to be talking to, and he wants to make a point. His purpose in the Sermon on the Mount is to get people to join his discipling group. And we have been discussing the requirement of the judgment and righteousness and all that stuff. And I want to relate that discussion to the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is Yeshua's message to the crowd. He would go around talking to people, walking in the Spirit, and he would get their attention with some sort of a supernatural gift. He would give a word of knowledge, a miracle, a healing, something like that to get their attention. And then once he got their attention, he would give them a message. And it would be the Sermon on the Mount or some short version of that. Because the point that he wanted to make with them is God has done something with you. Your response should be to join my discipling group. So we can split up the Sermon on the Mount takes 3 chapters, and they're split up very well because there's 3 major topics that he covers, and they're logically connected. The first chapter, he talks about the requirement. The requirement is 100% righteousness. And he actually finishes that chapter. The last verse in chapter 5 says you have to be complete like your Father in heaven is complete. And that's pretty high standard. That is perfect righteousness. And you know, a lot of people, as he starts talking about this stuff, they recognize that they are deficient. And in fact, he starts off the chapter with this. He starts off with saying, "Blessed or happy are those that are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, poor in spirit means that you're deficient spiritually. Now, most people that you talk to recognize that they are deficient spiritually. But then on the other hand, there's other people who think that they've arrived and they're good to go and they're making it into heaven and they don't really need anything. And so for those who recognize that they're deficient spiritually, they should be happy because they've already figured out what he's telling them in chapter 5. But for those who think that they're good enough to get into heaven, he's going to go through and talk about, well, what are the requirements? And he says specifically that it's doing all of the commands in the Torah. And it's not just the commands that rabbinical Judaism emphasizes, but it's also all of the little subtle commands. And that's why he gets into the idea of it's not just murder, but it's also hate. It's not just adultery, it's also lust. And he wants to catch all of these guys that think that they are living righteously. And if that hasn't caught them all, if there's anybody that still thinks that they're good to go, then by the end of the thing where he says that you have to be complete, just like your Father in heaven is complete, that'll catch whoever's remaining at that point. Now, he is trying to shock people. He's trying to get them upset. He wants them to be upset because he wants them to have a need for his discipling program. If they're not upset, then they're going to say, well, you're not that great of a salesman. We're going to spend our money somewhere else. Now, in chapter 6, he comes back and he says, now that they're upset, he comes back and he says, God provides everything. Okay, you know, he provides, the flowers have beauty greater than any rich man, and they don't do a thing because God takes care of them, and they're not very important. People are more important than them, and God is going to take care of your needs. You have this requirement that which God has placed upon you, but you also have the solution which God is making available to you. Not only is he making the solution available to people, but he's actually going out and getting them. He's actually going out and doing miracles, doing healings, raising the dead, word of wisdom, word of knowledge. All of this stuff that apostles do is designed to get people's attention. Now, there's no apostles today, but probably all of us at some point have come to the realization that God exists because of something that happened in our life. Could be something really subtle, it could be something big. Whatever it was, it got our attention, and that was God coming to us and getting us. We weren't even looking for him, but he came and got us. And he got our attention, and then he started giving us little bits and pieces and moving us along the road till we're at where we're at. Right now, we have learned all kinds of traditions, right, on the path. We have, we're operating, we're doing Thanksgiving, we're getting all kinds of input from God, and he is working on us. He's working on us big time. And we should be thankful for all those things, because all those things is God. God did all those things. We didn't do anything. The one little thing that we're supposed to do is simply respond to what God is doing. And when we do something that we're supposed to do, even that is something that God has enabled us to do. So we can't take credit for anything. God is doing it all. And in chapter 6, he takes the time to talk about how God is going to take care of us. If you have this requirement, you have two choices. You can say, I can't do that, I give up. Or you can say, I know that God loves me. God is a good God, and he has a solution for this thing. And all I have to do is figure out what that solution is and get on board with it. And then he can fix the problem. And so that's what chapter 6 deals with. Now, chapter 7 makes it more specific. He said, now God, in chapter 6, God is going to take care of all this. Question is, how is he going to do it in particular for you? Well, how he's going to do it in particular for you is that he is providing a discipling group where you can learn this stuff and grow and become an apostle and learn to live righteously and pass the judgment and eventually actually get into heaven, rather than being duped by somebody that says you don't have to do all that and you can go to heaven. So So chapter 7 is where he gets into, what kind of a teacher should you look for. You should look for one who is bearing fruit, right? So the fruit of the Spirit should be in that teacher. The miracles, they should be doing the miracles of God, the signs of the apostles. Those are the things that you look for in a teacher. If you find a teacher that is not doing all those things, then you should recognize that they probably are not going to be able to get you to do those things. How can they get you to do something that they can't even do? And so that's and of course, who is that? Well, it's the person who's standing there who just did a miracle that got your attention, right? In other words, Yeshua's standing there. He's asking them to find a good teacher that does all this stuff, and boom, I'm right here, and I can tell you exactly how to get all this stuff done. But you have to come and listen to my words and do them. You have to practice this stuff. You have to get into the discipling group and learn this stuff. And it's a long year program in order to get there. It's not something that you can do in a seminar on the weekend. So it's the requirement is huge, but the solution is also huge. The solution is adequate. The solution is big, and getting into the discipling group, studying with Yeshua for a year to learn to live righteously, that's the solution. And of course, that involves a whole bunch of things. Paul summarizes it by walking in the Spirit in chapter 8, verse 4 of Romans. But that summary is a good summary in the sense that at that point, the next step is to get the Spirit. And so that's what he talks about in that thing. But of course, you're going to run into the problem very quickly of consistency. How are you going to do that consistency? Well, the rest of the discipling program is going to help us take care of that consistency problem. And so what we see in the Sermon on the Mount is that Yeshua will do a miracle. Then he will talk about the requirement, get you very upset that you're not going to make it into heaven. Then he's going to tell you that God has the solution. You just need to seek it from God. And then he's going to say specifically what you need is to get into this discipling group, and so that we can train you to operate consistently in all of these things. And so this is the organization of the Sermon on the Mount. And so this was his message. This was the way he talked. This was how he presented this to the crowd. And so we need to think about that. When you look at the Inductive Path booklet, the first place it goes is not Romans. It goes first to the Sermon on the Mount and has you actually do the questions and reading there. Because that is the first thing that you would hear from Yeshua. He would talk to the crowd. He would invite them to join the discipling group. And so that's the first thing that you would learn from him. And then you go into the information in Romans once you get into the discipling group. So we're supposed to be reviewing the gospel as a part of Galatians. So I'm giving you a little review on the Sermon on the Mount. So I'm not sure how much we studied on the Sermon on the Mount. We kind of took this thing backwards. we started in Corinthians about how to operate the congregation, and then we went back and studied Romans because that was required for membership. And so we kind of backed into this thing. So I'm not sure if we actually covered too much in the Sermon on the Mount. So what I'm giving you is a good overview of the Sermon on the Mount. If you are unfamiliar with it, this would be a good time to go back and read through it and get familiar with the Sermon on the Mount. Because when we go out as apostles, we're going to want to understand the gospel, because that's what we're going to be giving to people. But in particular, we're going to be inviting them to the disciple training. And that's the Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to want to do some sort of supernatural gift as the Spirit leads to get people's attention. Whatever it takes to get their attention. Yeshua did all kinds of things that would get people's attention. Some people, they already were seeking this thing because God had already gotten their attention. And so whatever it takes to get their attention, that's what you do first. And then you have to go through this sermon in the sense of making sure that they understand that they need this thing, that by understanding the requirement, then that God is going to provide the solution. They don't have to do it, that they have to participate in it, okay, and they have to do the one little thing that they're supposed to do, but even the ability to do that is given by God. The whole thing is ultimately coming from God, and He will take care of us. And by keeping our eyes on God, who provides, rather than us, who is deficient, we can keep encouraged that we're going to get there. And then specifically that what is the answer is getting into the discipling group, and then giving the gospel once they are coming to the meetings. So this is how we're going to operate. This is going to be our bread and butter as apostles. And then once you get them there, then you have to train them up in the discipling path and get them out and going, and then supervise them and so forth. So you're going to, it's the whole thing, but being very, very familiar with these beginning issues, these beginning steps, how to invite them, how to share with them the gospel, how to get them to respond to each of these issues so that they can progress. This beginning stuff we have to be very, very familiar with in order to do that. Okay, so the Sermon on the Mount, and I hope this puts into perspective the requirement. Why is the requirement important? It is a part of getting people interested in joining the group. Now, once they join the group, of course, they don't have to be continually beating themselves up about not fulfilling the requirement, because we know we don't fulfill the requirement. Okay, so that is something that we've accomplished. The next thing is to learn to focus our eyes on God, learn to focus our eyes on the solution, learn to focus our eyes on the fact that God is going to get us to that place of fulfilling that requirement. And it's all about Him, and anything in the past is not important in terms of our failures, but all of the traditions, You know, I gave you that list on the traditions that we have learned so far, and all of you said that you were doing most of those traditions. That's huge. You should be thanking God for every one of those items, because that's something that God has imparted to you as a part of this solution. And the fact that He has accomplished that means that He will continue to accomplish the rest of the path. So all of this stuff should be encouraging to you if you're doing your Thanksgiving for all of these things, if you're looking to God, who is the solution, and if you are uh, increasing your Thanksgiving. If you still have negative um, inner dialogue, then that means that this week we need to increase the Thanksgiving. And next week, if you still have the negative inner dialogue, that means you need to increase the Thanksgiving again. And keep doing that each week until that inner dialogue changes into just natural Thanksgiving. When you wake up in the middle of the night and your first thought is to complain about something, you know that you are you still have ways to go. But you need to think about the fact that um, there's a whole bunch of things that you have accomplished already, and those are the things in the past that we need to think about, and thinking about God in terms of how He's going to take care of us in the future. So, Sermon on the Mount.